This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Well, since you have never been on the Melt before, and just in case there's somebody who is just now stumbling upon you and your work, what brought you to the topics and subjects that you talk about in your latest book, Dark Matter Monsters?
Yes, the book. It's a year old at this point.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, Chris. This book was published June 28th and July 27th for the soft cover, August for the hardcover.
Fantastic.
Thanks for mentioning it. I'm very happy with that project. How did I get involved with all this?
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of ways to look at that. I had a UFO sighting with my mom in the Everglades at the age of 11 or 12. And it was big and bright. And it definitely, even to a very young mind, I could see this thing did not belong here. It did not have the vibe of anything terrestrial. And I knew nothing about UFOs. It was just right over us. I thought it was the moon. I kept saying to my mom, look at the moon, look at the green moon. And the moon was on the horizon. She said, why do you leave me alone, kid? You know, and then we both had binoculars. I got her attention and we looked at it and she goes, Sim, it's a UFO. And we're both and it went from totally stationary to moving. I mean, if you had thought it was just an odd cloud, it just picked up speed all of a sudden and moved into a cloud.
Crazy.
And there was structure in the binoculars. You could see things that looked like structure. But the object was amorphous. Like, what does your mind do with that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, was it, when you first saw it, was it stationary?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was stationary enough to convince you it was the moon. But it made you feel like you were being observed. And my mom always said, they zapped you. And that's why you got interested in all these topics.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the short answer. And that's what she says to this day. They zapped you. And because it did feel strange. And then we went to the ranger talk in the Everglades. And the ranger, my mom, what did people see today? And my mom says, we saw a UFO. And the ranger said, oh, okay. Anybody else? And like, she did not want to go there, you know, and like a typical government employee, like just, okay, next topic. It was a weather balloon, you know. And then there was a blackout. And the people we sat next to on the benches that they have at those amphitheaters and national, they had seen it too. So here were more witnesses, a blackout, and a ranger that was just like, I'm not talking about it. Don't bother me. Let's go to the next person.
Interesting.
My mom even went up to her after the talk and said, no, but we really did. And that's interesting. Maybe it was Venus, you know. This is 72, 73. Right after Project Blue Book allegedly closes down. So the government was still in this mode of, you know, it's a weather balloon. It's
exactly.
It's misidentifications of a planet or something. So that might have been my first experience. But I'll tell you how I got into it more recently. I did not pursue these topics very much. I had a kind of ordinary education. I mean, I finished, high school, went to college, went to grad school, eventually ended up getting a Ph.D. at WSU in Pullman, Washington. not far from where I am at the moment. And I taught statistics. They even hired me back as an assistant professor to teach statistics. Statistics, Chris, is very linear. It's
Yes.
very normalized. It's designed to take a complex world and make it simple for your brain.
Of course.
Yeah, and there's a lot of questions nowadays about statistics, about the motivations of the people that invented it.
Exactly.
Fisher and Pierce, 100. Even in Science magazine, where is statistics inherently racist? Because you have this idea what's normal, and do people fit into that normal, and who's normal? Well, it's it's a white male.
Yeah.
No. I
Yes.
mean, I don't know how to put it. It's us. We're the normal, and everything else is like we fit to our current. And I can see why people are there. There have been steps to remove Fisher and Pierce's names from monuments and buildings where that can, because it's an attempt to normalize reality. And
Yes.
at the University of Arizona, I was told to throw out outliers in your data set that don't fit the regression line.
Interesting. That's a giveaway right there. So they
Yeah, it's
skew the statistics.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, create bias
Yes.
based on your preconceptions. And I'm sure the people that taught me this didn't think they were doing that.
Mhm.
They were thinking, how do I get something that's going to publish easily and make me
Yeah.
look good in front of my
Exactly.
colleagues?
Yes.
And you want things to fit to a line, independent and dependent variables. We want a nice linear relationship. You take X vitamin and you'll get Y result. You
Yes.
take this pharmaceutical. And that's how our modern minds work. We like linear, ordinary stuff until I came across fractal geometry and chaos theory.
Oh yeah, yeah. That'll take you in a different direction.
This is the book. This is the book that did it for me.
Wow.
I
It's
just
like
happened to have it on the desk because it's so fun to reread the text that blew your mind, with all these strange space filling curves. Objects that are what? What are fractals? Objects between dimensions. They don't completely fill space like an ordinary object. They're more and more detail the smaller you go, and they never completely fill the space.
Yes.
There's always more edge and more detail. And it opened me up to the idea that maybe science was like seriously mistaken about how it was looking at reality. This is before remote viewing and any serious study of UFOs, any of the topics I study now. It came from science. And isn't that a success story for science? Is something showed me that the way I was taught to do things, there could be something seriously wrong with it, because none of my 5 graduate committee members, 5 guys in the social department, wanted anything to do with fractals or chaos theory.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I had to go to entomology to find a guy named Alan Berryman, a British guy that was into this, and he had written papers on chaos theory. For people listening, that's a small change can have a big effect. Butterfly effect.
Yes.
A butterfly flapping its wings over the Amazon could change the weather in Germany. And this guy Berryman, and I'm told he's passed on now, he spent a lot of time with me, and he didn't have to. He was studying insect population dynamics, and he said, no, you're right. It's much more complex than a linear relationship because these boom bust cycles and a little change. So I was able to find some allies there at WSU.
Cool.
Yeah, and I ended up getting my PhD in fractal geometry.
Oh, wow.
Topics. I mean, not a sociologist doesn't get a degree in math, but I had studied the math, and I had it down and the equations to show that things aren't really lines. They could pretend to be lines, but that's your mind imposing a Western mechanistic view on reality. So that's where it starts for me, Chris, before I hear about remote viewing in Boulder in 1996 on my community radio station. Courtney Brown, who had started something called the Farsight Institute, and he was teaching classes, and he had taken it. He told us, and it was new back in programs declassified in 95, a government psychic spying program called remote viewing, run out of the Defense Intelligence Agency with help of the Central Intelligence Agency, employing a special access program at Stanford Research Institute, as it was called back then, in Palo Alto. And they had psychics that they were using to spy on the Soviet Union, and the Soviets we learned later, had at least five KGB departments with their own remote viewing programs. Their best physicists were involved in this. When I heard about this, part of my mind that had been looking at fractals said there must be things that we weren't told about in school that are true. And maybe remote viewing is one of those things, so I should investigate it. And that's why I went and took the classes, because I was convinced that there must be more to reality than science really understood. And maybe this was one of those phenomena that would, it didn't hurt that Courtney also studied chaos theory.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So
we're having Courtney on in a couple of weeks, actually. Funny you should mention his name. Yeah. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No. I don't want to just keep talking.
That's why people are here.
Well, I can go on for this forever because it just gets more interesting, because you go take remote viewing and who shows up in these classes. Courtney hired me back to be a teacher there, partly because I had a Ph.D. and it gives a respect to, your institute to have academics there. And I wasn't bad at remote viewing. I could do it and get results sometimes like anybody can. And I could explain it. Well, who shows up at these classes eventually? People who had worked with the government and NASA, who told us the government's hiding a really big secret. And these were not lightweights. It was an astronaut who had worked in the shuttle program, a so-called civilian astronaut, because they actually, they like trained 200 people for 4 slots, just for standbys. And this is one of those guys that's trained, goes through the whole thing, but never actually goes on to the missions. But he said he had seen the evidence. There was a guy there that John from LA, who had worked for NASA transcribing the 16 millimeter film from the cameras they used on the Apollo missions. And probably before Gemini and the other missions, he was an expert in video, and he had created a machine that would, back then this was probably high tech. You put the 16 millimeter film in and it transfers to video. Oh, cool. Nice. Yes. And he said, you wouldn't believe what's on the moon. I've seen the original video that they haven't shown to everyone else, and there's structures there. I mean, he had no doubt that there were structures. He's 100%. He said you could see them on this video. He said if you had a telescope, you could probably see them with the naked eye too, if you knew where to point. Origins of the structure? Did he conjecture that? Or he was convinced that there had been an extraterrestrial civilization there and a war. He said some of these buildings looked like they'd been bombed out, broken glass, stuff like that. Interesting. And we've heard about this from other people. More recently, including Ken. I forgot that guy. It was another civilian astronaut, Ken. He wrote this book about getting the whole set of NASA photos and looking through them and seeing all these structures and things. What was he called? Ken something, My Moon. I'll remember it, because he was a very interesting guy. I later saw at conferences. And then you had all these witnesses in Steve Greer's Disclosure Project. Yes. Who was that fellow from Vermont? He unfortunately he was killed in a bicycling accident. It did seem just to be a real accident. He was the one who said that he was in a facility, an NRO facility once, and a guy said, "Hey, we've discovered structures on the moon. You want to see?" And and this, before someone else came in, he was like looking at these. And this is like, I mean, I guess we can say it. There was a time you could not say these letters, NRO. You can say them now. They advertise on LinkedIn. Exactly. For God's sake. So you'll see their ads. We can say their name now. I think there was a time where it was like illegal to mention. But anyway, what was his? It'll come back to me. It's in the Disclosure Project. It's on YouTube. And he said, no, he was looking. This guy said, no, we've seen these structures there. And he looked. Well, this is exactly what Ken Johnson said. When he saw them, he saw stuff that he went in once, just what Donna O'Hare had said, another Stephen Greer's witnesses, that there were teams called professional strippers, and they strip out anything from NASA photos that they feel could confuse the public. Confuse the public, not educate the public, but confuse us. Confuse, like an extra dot here or there, or a structure or a craft that shouldn't be in your moon photo. Interesting. And Ken stumbled upon these people just as Donna O'Hare did. And the witness I'm thinking about, the guy who retired to Vermont, who was in that facility where that guy says we've discovered structures on the moon, also was told that they have groups that airbrush these things out before they're shown to the public. Well, this is what John had told us from LA back at Farsight. So it really convinced me that this was a much deeper topic. Oh, while we're on this subject of NASA, I ran into a fellow that had worked at NASA as an astrobiologist, Dr. Richard Hoover. And I wrote about him in Black Swan Ghosts. I have a chapter on him.
Cool.
Because I spent days with him at the Open Minds UFO Congress, International UFO Congress outside of Scottsdale, Arizona, before they moved to Phoenix. He told me the most incredible stories of suppression of UFO information that he personally knew about. It got him to quit. Can you imagine someone with 200 peer-reviewed papers and 30 patents in extremophile life? He had gone to Antarctica and all these places where you have life forms that have adapted to very extreme conditions. And he said you would find them in meteorites too once you open them up. And he was told by his bosses at NASA, we don't want you talking about this at conferences because it could confuse the public.
What do you think that decodes to? What do you think to confuse the public means?
Richard told me, because he asked them, what does that mean? And they said it's a directive from the White House. And Richard, he was incredulous. He said, well, what directive? He goes, they don't want this coming out now. It could incite fundamental religious groups.
Strange.
Yeah, there's a timeline. And he was told you're going faster than the timeline for disclosure.
Gotcha.
And this is no, look, we've got a creature here. No noses in the.
I just want to pitch in.
Yeah, they cannot stand that one. Only a year old. Richard told me that he quit over this. Can you imagine someone of his caliber quitting? He was the top astrobiologist on one of the top, and he had other colleagues, and they all thought that there was fossilized life forms found in carbonaceous meteorites. But NASA told them point blank, we don't want you going to conferences talking about this. If you go, don't mention this. And he said, no one tells me. Ouch, someone's biting me. Sorry, I'm getting bitten. No biting, Mr. Golden Bear. No. Sorry.
That's okay.
We're on TV. We have to behave.
Unless you've got something to add to the story.
Look at it. Look what I have to do. So, okay. It built up all from remote viewing. I'll stop right there and you can ask more. You go to something just like remote viewing. It turned out to be real. You know, my first book, Opening Minds, was about discovering resonance, remote viewing, crop circles, things like that. Remote viewing really worked, and it worked more than I would have thought as a statistician. I will tell you, as someone that taught statistics, you would expect yourself, if you were just guessing randomly, to I'm getting attacked here by a red dog, and this is not a joke. Here, let me tell you something about these dogs. When they sense that you're not responding completely because they know you're being watched, it encourages them to lunge.
Exactly.
You're like, why aren't you responding? Come on, we're gonna play, and you gotta. And I'm trying to say, dude, we're on TV. Okay, stop it. Out. We're gonna out. These things were real, and it cascades. You can kind of realize you haven't been told the whole truth about reality. There's just more, and there's science behind it. And then you hear about these things that we're hearing about now from Congress: special access programs. Black budget programs, as was the RV program. The people in the RV program, the military guys, for the most part, mostly guys, said they didn't tell their wives what they were doing when they would go up to visit Ingo Swann in Manhattan once or twice a month for training. They couldn't tell them. It was so these black budget programs lead to things being compartmentalized. And so what you end up with is people who want to tell someone their story. but they can't for fear of federal prosecution because they signed these NDAs, non-disclosure agreement. So this all comes out of remote viewing. Just the program, the whole thing is so fascinating. Even if it wasn't connected to other topics, it's amazing that we all have this ability to perceive information without using physical senses, something that many people in the program have talked about, Ingo Swann and others. It's built into us. It's another set of senses that we weren't told about, but it cascades into other paranormal type topics. And you meet increasingly credible people. You start going to conferences. Anyway, I'm giving you a very long-winded answer
Oh,
of how I got involved with it. It just, you
perfect.
begin to encounter very credible people, like we're hearing Congress is getting testimony from these people right now. UFO witnesses, and they are crafting legislation as we speak. It's already in one of these Senate bills, the Authorization Acts, budget. That if you have any knowledge, firsthand knowledge of UFOs or a piece of something, you have to you have to notify the Pentagon, the AARO office, All Domain Anomalies Resolution Office, one of the new UFO offices there, UAP as they call it. You have to notify them. So I've known about this for 25 years since speaking to witnesses at conferences, and these are very credible people. So basically what you realize is this, Chris. There are people out there with another story of reality. The public has one sense of reality that we get from the news and from the media and from education. And you come across these experts and people that are really tops in their field that have worked in the federal government or as a contractor, and they are telling you a different story of reality, that we're not alone.
Yeah.
And some of them don't care anymore about whatever NDAs they signed. And maybe some of those NDAs have expired and they can start talking more freely. But I mean, you start coming across these people and they seem to be attracted to things like remote viewing. Maybe they just feel they'll meet like-minded people who are open-minded. I think that's the main thing. I think what they really want is someone just to listen to their story without ridicule. And right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the Farsight Institute has done a lot of really incredible work. How long were you with them?
I was there for a little over a year.
But they've done remote viewing, the crucifixion of Christ, and Mars, the surface of Mars, like all of this really incredible stuff. And I think, do you think that maybe one of the reasons that nobody wants to publicly legitimize remote viewing is because that seems to go directly against this sort of materialist, reductionist narrative that we're being presented, as if we live in a material world, a material plane. Stuff like that is just airy-fairy, especially things that you can do yourself and learn and train other people to do. So they don't want us to think outside the box. They don't want us to peek behind the curtains, and then the curtain after that, and then the curtain after that. Like, do you think that there's a that there's an agenda behind that? Do you think that has to do with keeping us based in material reality?
Yeah. Listen, I am not a conspiracy theorist at all. I'm a trained sociologist. I mean, we really look at things scientifically. I don't believe in conspiracies, but we know from the witnesses there has been a huge disinformation campaign around many of these subjects for decades.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you recover from that as a society when you've been taught to ridicule these subjects, and at the same time the government's pouring money into these types of programs to learn as much as they can, as was Soviet Union and China, because they know that it works. It is partly, we have witnesses like Richard Doty from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and I interviewed him. It's on my YouTube channel. And he said, and he's told this to other people. It wasn't just, told this to Stephen Greer and other people. There's other interviews. You can hear him saying they would just pay journalists to say whatever they wanted.
Exactly.
And, on one of my crop circle tours, I got involved with crop circles just briefly from remote viewing. I was just really curious what these objects were. We had remote viewed them. You can remote view anything and you want some feedback. So I started going over to England on And it was very fascinating to see what was going on there and the weird effects on cameras and batteries. And we can get into that in a moment if you're interested.
Please, absolutely.
Yeah. We had a woman who's passed on now, Diana. And we were just talking with her one day, myself and Ron Russell, who gave these tours from the Denver area. And she said, "Oh, I worked for the CIA." And we said, "Well, what, can you say what you did?" She said, "I worked in the media department." Well, what does the media department do? She said, "I had a Rolodex of, I think it was 400 journalists. We would send them stories to run."
Of course.
So
or
I
their
said,
versions.
"What was that?"
Or their versions of stories.
Well, that's what I asked her.
Yeah.
I said, "Did you rewrite their stories maybe for national security? Maybe they're saying too much and there's something you don't want getting out. Or did you just write stories, completely fictional stories, and have them run it as if it was real?" And she said both.
Wow.
So this is the thing, is we're so confused at this point because we don't know what we've been reading is real. And I think this is going to lead to years of investigations of who's been complicit in this sort of deception, because we can't have a democracy or a democratic republic based on false information. It just won't. It won't last. The basis of our society is freedom of the press, freedom of speech. We're doing this right now in a broadcast like this. You can't do this in every country. If we were in China, Chris, we wouldn't be able to do this. They could turn us off. But you can't do that here. It's what we all love about this country. If we can't have information that we know is veridical information that we can verify, right? Because of a huge black budget for disinformation. As Richard Doty told us, they would just have huge amounts of cash. Doty was in the Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. And it wasn't like he was just, from what I got talking to him, not just spreading the money all over the country. He was focused on Albuquerque. And they didn't want people too interested in UFOs. And for their reasons were they didn't want people interested in the drones and things they were testing out at Kirtland. But Doty said they would hire actors. They would hire actors.
Wow.
To go to your home to pretend to be a UFO investigator to get your evidence, and you wouldn't get it back.
Crazy. That's some foresight.
They did this with Kirtland and AOFOSI and other. Was this a national? I mean, was this going on all over the place that we were? I think I'm not the only one. Obviously, it's not just me and fellow UFO investigators that are interested in this. I mean, this is something that the Senate's talking about right now. You heard Marco Rubio make references to this.
Yes.
But what's actually going on here? And are we out of the loop of something that's really important? Well, from talking to all these witnesses, I would say yes. So to answer your question, it's partly from that side. There have been disinformation campaigns, which I think must be illegal because there's nothing that allows the military to use its resources against American citizens. I mean, they can look for spies here and things like that. That would seem legitimate. It's what we have the FBI for. But they're not supposed to be targeting Americans on American soil. No one's supposed to be doing that. There's no authority for the military to do that or any of the intelligence agencies, And we had the church hearings, didn't we, when was that? In the 70s about this sort of issue, about how much the media had been complicit in this. It seems to have gone on. And talking to this woman, Diana, on the Crop Circle tour, I mean, she just felt like it was her job to run stories. I mean, what's the effect in our minds when we don't know fact from fiction? But let me have another angle on it as a sociologist. There's a part of us, all of us, it's called confirmation bias.
Yeah.
We have biases in our own thinking to want to see reality that confirms what we believe to be true because there's a comfort factor.
Of course.
In seeing things that confirm what you believe to be true. And it gets worse as you get older. You get more locked in to, what do they call it? Hardening of the attitudes.
Yeah.
It's something hardens unless you work at it. Like
exactly.
Like you and me and are their listeners, right?
Yes.
because the more I go into these subjects matter, even dark matter monsters about cryptids, I had never heard of, I wouldn't have believed the things that I heard from witnesses that I've interviewed. I wouldn't have believed it was true even 5 years ago that there are creatures out there. It's because it's uncomfortable. And we all want to go back to that comfort zone at the end of the day. We want to turn on the news or something that confirms our view. Because quite frankly, we really have no idea what's going on in the universe.
Yeah,
Nobody
exactly.
really knows. We have ideas, we have religion, and these are all just basic, very basic approximations of reality with lots of bias and political agendas and
Oh yeah.
power. So let's be honest, we really don't know what's going on. We don't know what universe we live in. We don't know what goes on planet Earth. And as I get older, I realize what we were taught in school was a story. Even someone like Lou Elizondo said something like this recently. Lou, who had worked at OSAP ATIP or whatever it's called. There's debate about which program was which, but he said he had this thing. I just read it, a quote of his. He said, what happens if you just tell people, everything you ever heard from the moment you were listening to your parents is wrong or not complete, that there's more going on. It takes a very mature person, and it's very easy for groups of people to feel threatened by that and become defensive and create ideologies. And we've seen this throughout history, and it turns into these political groups that become violent to try to defend their point of view.
Exactly.
And it's going to hit us really hard in the US because we've had 70, or maybe David Grush, I guess the most recent witness to come forward, 80 years of disinformation. I have gone to conference after conference, mostly in the Las Vegas area, starting shortly after remote viewing, just to see what is going on here. I mean, I met more witnesses and more people and more of them. And then you realize there's something really big going on here. There's like crash craft and reverse engineering programs. And I'm glad it's finally reached the Congress and that someone's taking action about this, because I have been very uncomfortable with it for 2 decades, hearing these witnesses, and then they say I can't talk about it. I could be sued by the federal government. I signed something new. So I'm glad that there's legislation being passed right now to mandate that witnesses come forward, and aerospace companies, whoever has pieces of this stuff, come forward, and you have to, in closed doors, so you have to tell Congress what you know so they can figure out, because they've been out of the loop too. It's quite complex and it's quite fascinating. And welcome to the universe. I'll say one more thing. This happened 500 years ago when Copernicus created this idea that he didn't even want published until he was on his deathbed for fear of retribution from the Vatican.
Exactly.
That the Earth-centered view, the Ptolemaic view, was not correct, that it was heliocentric. And then Galileo had the evidence with his telescope where he saw these little moons around Jupiter. And then he realized, well, maybe that's how the solar system is like. We're the moon around Jupiter, we're the Earth, And you had competing views. It took a while to sort out what it actually looked like, but we survived that. We're okay. I mean, It's not like this is the end of the world to find out that we weren't the very center of everything, that we're just a typical planet among billions of planets in our galaxy and billions of galaxies. And so be it. It grows, and that's where we're at right now. And I mean, I think it's fascinating, actually.
I do too. Yeah. I mean, even with the disclosure thing that's going on now, it has been going on for the last 2 or 3 years. I am very distrustful of media and of the government, especially in regards to subject matters like this, because I know that they, like I said before, the narrative that they want to put forth is we live in a material plane. Materialism is all that there is. What your senses can take in is all that exists, and no need to go anywhere past that. So that stops a lot of question asking right there if you buy that narrative. So most people don't think past that point. They think, like if CNN hasn't okayed it, then it's not worth even considering.
Well, we're playing catch up.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. That looks like
this is a book from decades ago by Max Born.
Uh-huh.
One of the quantum physicists that We use the Born rule to compute quantum. This book, I know, because I come across exactly what you're saying, even in the Bigfoot world, the Bigfoot community, when there's this argument, flesh and blood versus
Yes.
quantum woo.
Uh-huh.
It's a red herring fake argument. All matter is energy.
Yeah.
E equals mc squared. It's just the basis of relativity theory, general relativity theory, and quantum mechanics, which tells us that everything has a frequency. It's not woo, it's the basis of electronics, and
Exactly.
everything that has matter also has an energy component. And Einstein argued they were the same thing, and then quantum mechanics showed us that it was based on Planck's constant, and that there are formulas, very simple, for computing wavelength to Planck's constant to energy. So we've known for over 100 years that the world, the material, is also an energy world that doesn't have the solidity.
Yes.
It's in packets of waves, of wave energy. So what you're referring to, Chris, is what sociologists call cultural lag. It's a lag from what you know to be true to your beliefs. And we still have this sort of superstition about material things being more real, even though what you and I are communicating on right now is completely energy waves. I mean, there's a box here, but it's going across wires and
absolutely, via electricity. And there's also the subjectivity component of that, like the observation changes what is being observed, or everybody can observe what is seemingly the same phenomenon, only they can come back with a different experience of it, depending on how they interact with it.
No, that is true. And even someone like John von Neumann, who was, everyone said was so smart, it was like talking to an alien. Like he could just do these computations in his head, this Hungarian American physicist from, I think he lived until the 50s, and he created lots of very important discoveries and cybernetics and things like this. And he called that psychophysical parallelism.
I've never heard that term.
Yeah. And he argued that subjective states have to be real. They have to correspond to the objective world too. They're not less real because we can't see where they are, because they're an experience, they're a point of view. And that leads into the idea that we live in a multiverse, that there's multiple angles on any particular experience, all equally real. Real realities, different points of view on what we're seeing. Because if you can see it in your imagination, the psychophysical parallelism argument says it's real in some reality somewhere. And so this kind of leads to discussion of parallel realities, ways of resolving this quantum measurement problem and all of this. But this is what I came across studying Hugh Everett, who came up with this idea in 1957 of relative states, many worlds, and so forth. The idea that quantum mechanics suggests lots of possibilities that have to exist, and we're the ones that are limited. In other words, reality has this multitude of possibilities at any moment, and our perception of it is just a slice.
Yeah. So if we believe that materialistic, like it's all on the surface sort of thing, then we're never going to get past that. If we think that's all that's on the menu, we're never going to experience anything outside of that possibility. Right?
No, that's true. The reason when you push up against something, it feels solid, that's electromagnetic propulsion. That's the electron orbits repulsing off other electron orbitals. That's electromagnetic, repulsion. Just like you would feel if you push magnets together at the same pole, they push back. It's an electromagnetic force. At our scale, it seems like it's impenetrable and solid. But we know from research in neutrinos from the sun that billions are passing through your hands and mine every second. Trillions through your body, and they never hit anything because they're so small, the chance of a collision, they're so small, our matter is like as far apart as stars in the sky to a neutrino. And we're all empty space. And that really is the end of the materialistic argument, because you have to set up really expensive, complex neutrino experiments just on the hope that you might detect one. And they have some of these around the world, these different. I think there's one in South Dakota, and there's some in the Antarctic and so forth. And they hope to get like one neutrino interaction maybe a day or week, when trillions are coming through even the space of us every second, because they're that small. So the feeling that it's material is it's an illusion created by our perception. And so that's why quantum arguments are not woo or metaphysics or anything. It's just physics. It's basically everything is a vibration and a frequency. And you can see that very clearly. If you ever pluck a guitar string, you can see it vibrating back and forth, but it looks like it's clear because it's moving. Yeah. And based on the light you're seeing, it actually looks like you can see through it. And that's actually kind of a good metaphor for what's actually going on. There is something there, but it's also an energy form.
Interesting. Well, a couple of things. I want to know, go back to the CIA woman, or ex-CIA woman. What was she doing nosing around in crop circles?
That is exactly the question. These people, after being around all the disinformation that they helped create, are actually really curious towards the end of their lives, what is really going on? And they come to my remote viewing classes. They come on my crop circle tours. After my crop circle mentor, Ron, stopped doing them in 2006, he just turned the tours over to me, and I did them until COVID hit.
Cool.
Yeah, for over a decade. And just so many strange things happen in and around those crop circles. It's a whole big story. But you get these people out there who know a lot because of the positions they held. And they want to find out really what's going on because they've been creating all this disinformation. You know, it's like a flatland. They've been creating a flatland world for the rest of us, but they know that reality is really a sphere land. And there you go. So that's how I start my book, Opening Minds, by talking about Flatland. It's a parody on Victorian England by Edwin Abbott. And they convince the population that there's only a flat surface, but the rulers of Flatland know that there are spheres. And one day, one of the Flatlanders sees a sphere come through the table.
Yes.
And he's arrested. And he's told that, oh, yes, we've known all along, but we can't tell. And this is from 1880s.
Because it might confuse people?
Might confuse people.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah. So I forget what happens to A square at the end, but he's told that they knew all along. You know, it's like, 1984 or something. Yeah, where they know, but they're coming. So we're kind of like the Flatlanders, and it's up to us to discover the spheres because we have the tools to do it now. I mean, you can't hide these things forever. We have all these access to information, and we're getting a lot of good coverage of this. But these people go on these tours because they're genuinely curious.
Gotcha.
Like the rest of us, and they want to know, okay, I know what I've been told and what I've been saying within my position. I'm not saying these are bad people. They do their jobs. They are involved in national security. I mean, this is necessary. But how far did they go beyond what's legal to create confusion and denial and ridicule around the UFO subject? It's unfair to the witnesses to these phenomena to make them feel ashamed to tell their stories and to tell them, it's not good for your career. It's not good for your career to talk about this stuff. And they don't tell anyone for decades. We had people like this at the citizen hearing. in 2013 in DC. I went to that. It was held by the Paradigm Research Group. You remember that, the event?
Yeah.
Citizen hearing for disclosure. It was open to the public because it was the National Press Club. Anyone could go.
Yes.
Yeah, and we had folks who, missile control launch officers. Robert Salas had come forward, but he knew others, and Robert did his job, and he said, you need to come to this hearing and tell your story. And you had people like David Schindele and others. And Schindele said he was told it never happened when the missiles went down in his launch facility in Minot one day in the 60s. His commanding officer said, it never happened. You'll never talk about this again to anyone, not your wife, not your sweetheart, no one. Not even the missile service technicians that are coming in 2 hours. You don't tell them any, and he didn't. He follows up until Salas says, look, we got to tell somebody. We're retired now. What are they going to do to us?
Yeah.
So you have a lot of these people out there, and Schindele said he never told anyone until he told the citizen hearing, the mock hearing with, retired senator and Congress people. So, it's been going on quite a while I just wonder, Chris, how many witnesses are out there? There's got to be many, because I run into these people and I varying degrees of responses. Sometimes they will tell me their stories and I could put it in my books, like in Black Swan Ghosts. Other times they're told, no, there could be repercussions if you ever mention this. We never had this conversation. I've heard that just a few months ago. So I know there's a lot of these people out there. So really, it's how are we going to deal with this?
Exactly.
And but it is, again, it's an interesting question. You have these people come to remote viewing classes. They come on crop circle tours. You meet them at UFO conferences. And they're people that have served in positions where they have a better sense of what's really going on. And it's serious because as various people have pointed out recently, Ross Coulthart from Australia, the show he does with Bryce Zabel and so forth, need to know. I mean, it's likely that there's criminal acts have been committed here to keep this secret, because the benefits of having access to all that funding and the technology without sharing it, maybe it just corrupted people into going beyond the bounds of the system that we have, which is based on open discussion and dialogue, right? Well, we haven't had that with the UFO topic. You talk to average people and they're not sure what's going on anymore. They ask me, did you see that article, this and that? I have had people come up to me, people who served in academia at coffee shops who I just know. They say, Simeon, can I talk to you for a second? I said, sure. I said, well, what's going on here? What's the truth about this? And I said, it's real. They said, they're real. I said, really? Yes, it's real. It's been covered up. That's, it's like, well, I guess it's what Bryce Zabel called ripping the Band-Aid off. Are we going to rip it off slowly, or are we going to, because it looks to me like something went wrong here, like what Stanton Friedman used to call cosmic Watergate.
Yeah.
Something really went wrong in the system, and you had all this program since World War II go deep black with no oversight or very little oversight, or a lot of bribery or something, where Congress is supposed to be overseeing these programs. They've lost track of what's going on there. And there are things going on that they need to know about, because we have to decide if it's legal or not. Who has this technology? Who has this research?
Yeah.
Who are these people, and what are they doing? What are these companies? Are they organizations? It's something went wrong. And I think that's what the feeling is right now when you read about this. You can follow it just on Twitter, anywhere. Just read an article a day about what's going on with Congress and this disclosure with Gillibrand and Rubio and others. And they seem to be very concerned, and they've heard testimony we haven't heard, because they've been listening to this for 2 years. I'm told they've been listening to 2 years of closed door testimony from whistleblowers. I've spoken to some of these people. They haven't wanted to do any YouTube interviews with me. These people know about crash retrievals and pieces, and they've been asked to. The people I've talked to, they've been asked to reverse engineer this material, and I've been told it's so far ahead of what we have. There's not even a shred of possibility of figuring it out. At least the people I've talked to. Maybe there's other types that is more closer, but I mean, the size, the scale is so nanoscale.
Mm-hmm.
It's beyond the limits of our technology at the moment.
Sure.
To create, create materials that interact directly with the quantum field at an energetic level, just like we were talking about at the beginning of our conversation here. Yeah, literally technology that can interact at the quantum level to change frequencies and waveguides that change frequencies of light and permittivity, fundamental constants that to us are fixed, but to these craft are variables. They can alter space-time. They can change the structure of the quantum field. That's their propulsion. And I'm told we don't know how to do this yet. And by the way, it's okay to talk about this because I've talked to people in the government, and they have said these conversations like we're having right now are okay as long as you and I don't have a piece of something.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
We can talk about this all we want because a lot of people won't believe us anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're just ranting and raving.
It's fine to talk about this. We don't have any direct knowledge. We're not breaking any law, so we don't have to worry about that. But this is what we're dealing with now. There's only two possibilities here. There's a major breakdown in our political and economic system where there's some rogue companies or someone outside the bounds of what we consider to be the market as we understand it, and the political system, representation, checks and balances. Or a lot of super smart people with high clearances are making this all up and going to conferences and telling people like me about it.
Sure.
Which is also a very serious situation. If that would be true, this is not true, but you have had decades of people saying that they've seen this material, some of whom, like David Grush, have high enough security clearances that they get to brief the president every morning.
Yes, of course.
That caliber of person, and they're making this up. It's like what Robert Salas used to say about the missile control launch officers like David Shindeli and many others who Robert Hastings has written about. These guys are considered to be the backbone of, our military defense system, the people that have control over launching missiles, whether it be in subs or on land or so forth. Either UFOs and objects are tampering with these systems and shutting them down, or in some cases setting off the launch sequences, scaring these folks that they turn gray in about 5 minutes, or they're making this all up. These were people that could have launched missiles. They don't need permission from anyone. It's just two guys down there in the tube, in the facility, the missile control launch facility.
Yeah.
Two people can decide to launch those. It takes two in our system. It's not like in the Russian Soviet system where it has to be launched from Moscow. They can launch them on their own. So are you telling me these guys are all making this up? They're mentally ill. They're schizophrenics that believe UFOs are coming over and tampering, and they have the keys to launching World War III. Either way, it's a really serious situation. I'm not the first person to say this, Chris.
Yeah.
But come on, what are we talking about here? This should be front page news discussion every day or night. I mean, because something's wrong here. Something's really wrong. And I think I have a feeling of what it is based on the people I've talked to over a couple decades is you had these special access programs and it got so compartmentalized that they could never share their stories.
Yes.
Stovepiped it. And some of these people have told me the stovepiping is really counterproductive too, because they can need help with a problem they're working on. They can't talk to anybody outside their program or even within the program. They can't talk to the person next to them. It's really quite complex. This whole situation seems to be the outgrowth of a flatland type effect where you have secrecy over reality.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
You legalize it in terms of compartmentalization.
Yes, for national security.
For national security. And we can understand there's a reason. I mean, you had the Cold War. We didn't know what the Soviets were going to do. Maybe they were just as a mess as the Russians appear to be right now with their military situation in their adventure in Ukraine. But we can all understand there's reasons for secret. I mean, my dad was at D-Day. He landed at Omaha Beach, in 1944. And June 4th. Yeah. And I mean, I can understand why you have secrecy, because you can't give that away the night before you land.
Sure.
Everything's riding on that day, and it has to work, or you don't have there's no backup plan. So I can understand because he showed me his letters from World War II that he sent back to his parents in the US. And what they would do with those is transfer them to rice paper because it was lighter to bring on the planes. And the censor would cross out any details. And we have the letters from his parents, and a lot of it was crossed out. What he would say is probably, we want to visit a little cafe here. And that's like, you don't want the other side knowing where your troops. So I understand they were secret, but for decade after decade, I mean, eventually that's not a justification. I can understand that for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a couple of years, communication, security, sources and methods. I mean, we all understand it, but it's also damaging to national security not to have people have an intelligent discussion about reality.
True.
And the farther we depart from reality, the more likelihood that the country falls apart, becomes economically unviable, because we become stupid. We become dumbed down by our own security system.
Yes.
And I argue that's as dangerous as any invasion from a foreign country is lowering of IQ and conversational ability, and ability to even have an intelligent conversation about this subject.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's
absolutely.
quite complex, but I mean, we have to start somewhere. Got to start somewhere, and it starts on shows just like this.
Yes.
Who knows what congressman or senator, congressperson in your area might be tuned into this one day, and it helps them, and they,
hopefully.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know. I understand.
Let me give you one example. I know I'm talking a lot here, but this is something I think about so much. In Dark Matter Monsters, I put a story in which I had to get special permission to share. Someone who was a former Secretary of Defense, temporary, back in the 80s, told me one night at an RV conference, he said, I got a story for you that you'll enjoy. He goes, I was in a room when we were monitoring a Soviet PK experiment where the PK sender, we're talking about psychokinesis, folks. The PK sender was 1,000 miles away from Moscow, and the objective was to bend a spoon back in a lab in Moscow. And so he said there were 30 of us monitoring this live as it was happening. They were intercepting the radio or telephone communication somehow. I really would do it. I said, did the spoon bend? He goes, yep, it bent. Wow. I said, isn't that like a news headline? U.S. government has proof.
Yeah, exactly.
He goes, nope, sources and methods. The sources and methods outrules public discussion. I said, well, don't you think like kids, like I grew up on Star Trek as a kid. I mean, do you think that would inspire kids to want to learn PK and get involved in these subjects? I mean, stop the ridicule and say, look, one of the intelligence agencies has proof positive. Not that this was the first time. They had their own people that could do it in the remote viewing program. Lynn Buchanan and others. But I said, did you go down to Fort Meade to tell the remote viewing unit? He goes, nope. Wow. So they didn't even tell their own remote viewers who were up kind of against these other psychic spies and people like that in other countries with whatever spy shenanigans they were doing. They didn't even tell other people in the remote viewing program that did this sort of thing that would bend things. So that's compartmentalization. And it basically, I think the danger is, it seems to be that nobody knows the truth anymore because it's so compartmentalized. Once the people in that program die off, nobody really knows. And you've got this, maybe we could be going on with Roswell, is that we have these loose ends from Roswell. I mean, I talked to a woman whose dad, and I put this in Black Swan Ghosts. I talked to a woman whose dad flew. I was just in a cafe in Boulder once, and this woman asked me, because there was a list being passed around to sign for this comedy show that was about to start. And she just said, I said, oh, thanks for the list. I took it. I was going to write my name. She said, by the way, she said, have you been here for no? I said, no. She said, have you ever heard about Roswell? How's that a way to start a question, a
Exactly.
conversation in a deli in Boulder, Colorado? So it happened to be I had just heard about Roswell from Jim Mars, who had been in Colorado on a speaking tour.
Interesting.
And I got to sit around with 20 other people in someone's living room, and he told us about Roswell. I had never
Cool.
heard about it. I mean, I got a grad school. Who ever heard about Roswell? I never heard about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, as it happens to be, I do know about Roswell. And she goes, well, my dad, they kept him on from World War II. He was at the base. He flew the materials out from Roswell to Dallas, Fort Worth, I believe, and then to Wright-Patterson. And she said it was so serious he didn't tell our family until 2 weeks before he died.
Wow.
And he called each of his daughters into the hospital room one at a time to tell them that he was afraid there could have been repercussions against the family if he talked about it.
Crazy.
And I said, well, what did he say? What was in the cargo? And she said they didn't tell him, but it was serious enough that it had an armed guard next to the crate in the plane to guard it from the pilots.
Wow.
To guard the contents from the pilots.
That's crazy.
And he never left except briefly to use the bathroom and come back and slept next to the crate. So, I mean, she said no. The dad said that whatever it was really serious. And there was extra security, and I mean, it was life or death. So I don't think it was a weather balloon of any sort. I mean,
yeah, that's the picture I'm getting. It's not a weather balloon.
No, and deathbed confessions count for something. I mean, imagine not telling your family for decades until you're about to pass on in the hospital, and you don't want to die with the secret of Roswell. So I know for a fact something really important happened there, whatever it is.
Yeah.
One craft, two craft, whose craft? I mean, I don't know. But so you run across these people, and it is going back a long ways. And
Interesting sync.